The laughter started before he sat down. He did not hear all of it, just the tail end. A sound clipped short when the receptionist caught herself. A hand pressed briefly to a mouth, eyes that slid away too quickly toward a monitor that had nothing on it worth reading. He set his folder on his knee, Manila, worn at the corners, his name written on the tab in handwriting that belonged to someone who had once cared very much about small things being done correctly. Marcus Webb, Application Facilities Management. The waiting room of Calloway Meridian Capital occupied the entire 27th floor lobby of the Hargrove Tower in downtown Chicago. The ceiling was 30 feet high. The chairs were white leather. The receptionist's desk was a single slab of raw-edge walnut that had cost, according to the interior designer's invoice, $42,000. Marcus Webb sat in one of the white leather chairs in his cleanest clothes. His shoes were polished, not new, polished. There is a difference. New shoes announce money, polished shoes announce something older than money. The receptionist looked at his folder again, then at the elevator. She reached for her phone. The Quiet Life of Marcus Webb. 3 weeks before he walked into that waiting room, Marcus Webb was mopping a floor. Not metaphorically, literally. The floor of the Eastwick Community Center gymnasium on 44th Street, where the after-school basketball program had finished for the evening and left behind the evidence. Scuff marks, a spilled sports drink the color of something chemical, 2 forgotten knee pads, and a basketball someone had punctured and left in the corner as though it were already a burial. He worked from the far end toward the door. That is the correct way to mop a floor. You do not trap yourself in a corner. You do not create the problem you are trying to solve. Marcus was 44 years old. He was not a large man, but he was precise. There is a kind of precision that comes from discipline and a kind of precision that comes from grief, and in Marcus these two things had become the same thing so gradually that he could no longer separate them. His left hand had a faint scar that ran from the base of his index finger to his wrist. No one at the community center had ever asked about it. That was fine. He finished the floor at 7:47 p.m. He washed his hands. He changed out of his work shirt in the utility closet, folded it, did not stuff it, folded it, and put on the gray Henley he kept in his bag. He locked up. He walked 6 blocks to the number 22 bus. He was home by 8:30. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Larimer Street that had good bones and bad windows. The radiator knocked in winter. The stairwell smelled like someone else's cooking, which was not always unpleasant. He unlocked the door quietly, force of habit. In the kitchen, a casserole dish sat on the stove with a post-it note stuck to the lid. The handwriting was large and looping and belonged to Dolores from 3B, who had strong opinions about Marcus not eating enough and expressed those opinions the only way she knew how, through ceramic dishes left without comment. He lifted the lid, shepherd's pie. He ate standing at the counter, reading the note on the refrigerator written in a different handwriting, smaller, neater, the letters still working hard to stay inside an invisible line. Dad, I did my homework. Don't check it yet because I think there's a mistake in number 7 and I'm going to fix it tomorrow. Nia. He read it twice. The photograph on the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like the state of Illinois, a souvenir from a field trip 2 years ago, showed a girl of 9 with her father's eyes and her mother's jaw. She was laughing at something off camera. She always laughed at things off camera. Marcus touched the edge of the photograph, not the girl, the edge. He put the casserole dish in the sink to soak. Nia Webb was 10 now. She was, by every account Marcus trusted, completely fine. This was not nothing. For 2 years it had been the thing he held onto when other things slipped. She is fine. The asthma was controlled. The inhaler worked. The specialist at Northwestern, the one they'd seen every 3 months for the first year, then every 6, then annually, had used the word remarkable at the last visit. Remarkable was a word that people used when they did not want to say unexpected. Her mother, Claire, had not been remarkable in this way. Claire had been the kind of person who made everything around her more vivid, louder colors, sharper edges, the feeling that you were in the important part of the story when you were standing next to her. She had died 4 years ago in a way that was neither dramatic nor gradual, which is the cruelest kind. A brain aneurysm at 38 in the cereal aisle of a Jewel Osco on a Tuesday morning, with a box of granola in her hand. Marcus had been in Kabul. He had come home in 61 hours. He remembered the number because counting had been the only thing available to him on the flights. He had counted hours instead of feeling them. He did not talk about any of this at work. He had worked at the Eastwick Community Center for 2 years. Before that, a year at a facilities company that serviced office buildings downtown. Before that, 8 months of adjustment, which is what people called the period after the military when you are learning, again, what quiet sounds like. He had been in the Army Corps of Engineers for 14 years. He did not put this on the community center application. Not because he was ashamed, he was not, but because it had not seemed relevant and he had not wanted the conversation. He was good at his job, not eager to please good, not performing goodness good. He was good in the way that certain tools are good, balanced, reliable, used correctly they make the work easier, misused they make no difference either way because they have no ego about it. The director of the community center, a man named Gerald Park who coached basketball and filed paperwork and had not had a day off in 3 years, had once told Marcus that the gym had never smelled so clean. Marcus had said, "Drainage issue in the subfloor, I rerouted it." Gerald had blinked, "You rerouted it. Tuesday, while you were at the county meeting." Gerald had stared at him for a moment. Then he had gone back to his paperwork and not asked any follow-up questions, which Marcus had appreciated. The application for Calloway Meridian had not been his idea. It had been Dolores's idea, offered unsolicited over the casserole 2 weeks earlier, the one with the chicken. "There's a posting," she said, "senior facilities coordinator for that big firm in the Hargrove building." She had her phone out. She was 63 and read everything on her phone at arm's length. "Good benefits, good salary, it says comprehensive health coverage." A pause for families. She did not look at him when she said the last part. Marcus had been quiet for a moment. "Nia's coverage is fine." Nia's coverage is the plan you cobbled together from 3 different sources, and it doesn't cover the specialist if he changes practice locations. This was true. Marcus had not answered it. Dolores had put her phone down. She had looked at him the way older women sometimes look at men who are managing, with a tenderness that is also a kind of impatience. "You were an engineer," she said, "for the military for 14 years. I was. You rerouted a drainage system in a gymnasium by yourself on a Tuesday. It wasn't complicated." Marcus, she waited until he looked at her. Apply. He had revised his resume 3 times. Not because he was uncertain of what to put on it, he was not, but because there is a specific discipline required to write a resume when your qualifications dramatically exceed the position you are applying for, and that discipline involves choosing not to explain yourself, because explanation becomes apology and apology becomes weakness, and he had not come to apologize for anything. He listed what was relevant: senior facilities coordinator. He had done that job in 4 different countries, for structures that cost more and mattered more, and tolerated less margin for error than any glass and walnut tower in downtown Chicago. He put the Army Corps of Engineers in the experience section. He put his engineering certifications, and there were several, from institutions whose names would mean nothing to a receptionist and everything to the right person. He put the work at Eastwick last. He printed it on paper that did not come from the library printer. He bought a ream from the office supply store on Michigan Avenue. He took the exact number of sheets he needed. He returned the rest to Dolores, who used them for her book club minutes. He had ironed his shirt himself. He had polished his shoes. He had sat in the chair in the 27th floor lobby while someone pressed their hand over their mouth and reached for their phone. The building and the storm. The person who had reached for the phone was named Cassandra. Cassandra Vieth, 26, receptionist, Calloway Meridian Capital, employed 14 months. She was not a cruel person. She was a person who had learned very quickly what Calloway Meridian's culture rewarded, which was polish and pedigree, and the particular confidence that comes from never having had to think too hard about money. And she had adapted to this environment with the efficiency of someone who understood that adaptation is survival. She called the HR assistant. His name was Derek. "There's someone in the lobby for the facilities coordinator posting," she said, voice low, turned slightly away from where Marcus sat with his manila folder. "The one that just posted this morning?" "I think so." What's I mean is he. He has a folder. A pause, I'll come down. Derek Paulson, 24, arrived from the elevator in 4 minutes. He was wearing a shirt that fit well and shoes that cost more than Marcus's monthly bus pass. He looked at Marcus the way certain young men look at people they have decided. In the first second, they do not need to take seriously, not with hostility, but with a kind of administrative blankness, as though processing something that does not quite fit the expected format. Mr. Webb, Marcus said. He did not stand. He met Derek's eyes. Right, so Mr. Webb, the posting is actually quite specific in terms of the technical requirements are. I know what they are. Marcus opened the folder. He placed his resume on Derek's side of the low glass table between them. I meet them. Derek looked at the resume. Something in his expression shifted, a small recalibration barely visible as his eyes moved down the page. The certifications, the Corps of Engineers, the specific project designations that, if you knew what they were, told you something significant. But Derek did not know what they were. We'd typically ask someone for a portfolio. Page 3, Marcus said, project documentation, 5 structures, 2 of them are still load-bearing for active military installations. He waited. I couldn't bring the actual files, clearance issues. The word clearance sat in the air for a moment. Derek pressed his lips together. Right, I'll pass this along. I'll wait, Marcus said. The person who eventually came was not Derek. The person who eventually came was a woman named Renata Bloom, who was 51, who had been at Calloway Meridian for 9 years, who carried herself like someone who had won several arguments she had not particularly wanted to have. She was the Director of People Operations, which was a title that had replaced Human Resources somewhere in the previous decade and meant largely the same thing. She sat, she looked at the resume, she said nothing for 23 seconds. Marcus counted them. Mr. Webb, she said, your background it's substantial. Yes. The position we're advertising is facilities coordinator, not director, not chief engineer. She looked at him over her glasses, not unkindly. You understand what I'm saying. You're saying the job might be beneath my experience. I'm saying there might be a mismatch. Ms. Bloom, he said her name the way people say names when they want you to know they read your badge and paid attention. My daughter has asthma. The specialist she needs is at Northwestern. Your benefits package covers Northwestern-affiliated physicians. My current position does not. He closed the folder. I'm not confused about the job. I'm applying for it anyway. Renata Bloom looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I'll need you to come back on Thursday. Thursday came. He wore the same shirt. He had ironed it again. The interview lasted 40 minutes and was conducted by Renata and a man named Thomas Garrett, who was the chief operating officer and who had the distracted energy of someone running 4 conversations in his head simultaneously. Thomas asked the technical questions. Marcus answered them without elaborating, which seemed to unsettle Thomas in a way Marcus recognized. People who ask technical questions to feel powerful are disoriented when the answers are delivered without performance. After 30 minutes, Thomas had stopped asking questions. He was just listening. At the end, he said, you'd be working under our current facilities manager, Craig Stafford. All right. He runs a tight ship. Marcus said nothing. He had noticed in the hall outside the conference room a water stain on the ceiling tile that indicated a slow leak somewhere on the 28th floor. He had also noticed that the emergency exit light at the east end of the corridor was flickering on a 4-second cycle, which meant the backup battery was failing and had been failing for some time. He did not mention these things. This was not the moment. When can you start? Thomas asked. 2 weeks, Marcus said. I owe my current employer notice. Thomas had nodded. He seemed faintly like a man who was not used to being answered with 2 sentences when he expected 20. Craig Stafford was 43 and he had been facilities manager at Calloway Meridian for 6 years, and in those 6 years he had built something, not a team exactly, but a system. The system ran on a specific logic. Craig was indispensable. Every repair, every vendor call, every building issue passed through Craig. Craig translated. Craig brokered. Craig was the man who knew where the bodies were buried, which in a corporate building means the subcontractors who cut corners and the inspections that got filed before the work was finished, and the vendor contracts that had been signed with a particular firm because of a referral that involved, if you looked carefully enough, a personal financial interest. Craig had not been told why they were hearing. He had been told there was a new coordinator joining the team. He had not been told Marcus's name. He had not been told Marcus's resume. On Marcus's first morning, Craig had come into the facilities office on the 4th floor, not the 27th, not the lobby, a different kind of floor entirely, the floor with the ceilings that showed the pipes, and he had looked at Marcus and he had processed something. "Webb," he said, "you've done this kind of work before."
"Yes."
"Where?" "A few places." Marcus looked at the maintenance log on the wall. It was paper, handwritten. "Is this updated daily?" Craig's eyes moved to the log, back to Marcus, weakly. "Do you have a digital system?" "We have a system that works." Marcus looked at the log for another moment. Then he looked at the water stain he had noticed through the ceiling tile, which was now visible from directly below as a faint brown ring above the second bank of fluorescent lights. "28th floor," he said, "pipe near the HVAC junction, small leak, it's been running for a while." Craig was quiet. "Depending on where it's pooling, you might have a mold issue behind the wallboard." Marcus looked at him. "I can check it this afternoon if you want." Craig said, "I'll handle it." Marcus nodded. He picked up the daily rounds sheet. He went to work. The weeks passed. Marcus was quiet. He was on time. He fixed what needed fixing without announcing it, filed his reports without ornamentation, responded to maintenance requests within the timeframes posted on the operations board. He did not socialize beyond what was required. He ate lunch at his desk, or sometimes in the stairwell on the 12th floor, which had a window that faced east and got good light. He learned the building the way he had always learned structures, from the inside out, not from blueprints he had access to those, but from the way it sounded. The way the pressure changed in the pipes on the floors with the highest occupancy. The HVAC rhythms, the weight distribution across the parking structure, the elevator shaft that vibrated at a frequency that said "worn cable guide" to someone who knew what worn cable guide sounded like. He said nothing about most of it. He made notes. Craig watched him. Craig watched him the way people watch something they are trying to classify and cannot. There was a junior member of the facilities team named Leon Ockhaffer. Leon was 28. He had been at Calloway Meridian for 8 months. He had come from a union apprenticeship program and he knew his work, and he was this matters observant. The kind of observant that is not nosiness but simply attention. He paid attention because buildings interested him. He also paid attention because something about the way Craig operated had interested him in a different, less comfortable way since almost the beginning. Leon had noticed the vendor contracts. Or rather, he had noticed the pattern in the vendor contracts, that a single company, Starfield Maintenance Solutions, had won 7 of the last 9 major service contracts at Calloway Meridian, and that Starfield's bids were never the lowest, and that Craig's maintenance logs for work completed by Starfield contractors were, when you looked carefully, sometimes filed before the work had a timestamp for completion. He had not said anything about this. He did not know what to say or to whom. Then Marcus arrived. Leon watched Marcus for 2 weeks before he said anything. What he watched was this. Marcus looked at the same things Leon had looked at, the same vendor patterns, the same log discrepancies. He watched Marcus pull the maintenance database. Marcus had built a basic digital tracking system in his second week, a quiet replacement for the handwritten log that Craig had said worked, and cross-reference completion timestamps with contractor sign-in records. On a Thursday afternoon in Marcus's 5th week, Leon came to the desk in the facilities office when Craig was upstairs and said, "You've seen it." Marcus looked up. "The Starfield thing," Leon said. He kept his voice level. He was nervous, but he was not young enough to pretend otherwise. "You've seen it." Marcus held the younger man's gaze. "How long have you been watching it?"
4 months.
"Did you document it?" Leon hesitated, then he reached into his jacket and produced a folded printout, carefully folded, the creases deliberate, the paper handled more times than it had been printed. He placed it on the desk. Marcus looked at it for a long moment without touching it. "Put that somewhere safe," he said, "somewhere Craig can't access." "What are you going to do?" Marcus picked up his round sheet. "My job," he said. The storm arrived on a Wednesday. It had been building for a while, not meteorologically, but institutionally, the way these things always build, slowly and then all at once. The trigger was the Hargrove Tower's quarterly structural inspection, required by the city of Chicago for any building over 20 stories that had undergone renovation in the previous 5 years. Calloway Meridian had renovated 3 floors, 24, 25, and 26, 18 months prior. The inspection was scheduled by the city. It was not optional. The inspector's name was Paulette Abrams. She was not a person who could be managed. She arrived on a Wednesday morning with a deputy and 2 clipboards and the expression of someone who has seen everything and is not impressed by walnut desks. Craig met her at the elevator. He was smiling. He had the binder. The binder which Marcus had seen, which Marcus had reviewed on his 6th day and said nothing about, contained inspection reports that were complete and stamped and dated, and in at least 3 instances described work that had been listed as completed by Starfield Maintenance Solutions before Starfield's own work orders showed the crew on site. The binder said the 25th floor's load-bearing retrofit had been signed off in February. Starfield's crew sign-in logs said the crew had been on site for the first time in March. Paulette Abrams found this on page 47. She did not smile when she found it. The call came to the 27th floor at 11:14 a.m. Diana Calloway, founder, CEO, 59 years old, the name on the building, was in her office when Thomas Garrett knocked on the glass, which he only did when he could not send an email, which meant it was something he could not put in writing. She listened. She asked 3 questions. Then she was quiet for a while, looking out at the Chicago skyline, at the lake in the distance, at the particular gray of a Midwestern October sky that looks like it is waiting to decide something. The building was potentially facing a stop work order, a formal investigation into the maintenance records, possible fines, possible reinspection of all renovation work, possible, Thomas said the word quietly, liability. Diana said, "Where's Craig?" "He's with the inspector, trying to pull him out." She paused, quietly. "Diana. And get me the full maintenance files, everything, the actual files." She looked at Thomas, not Craig's binder. The actual files were in Marcus's system. This was not something Craig had anticipated. He had not anticipated the digital tracking system because he had dismissed it, had seen Marcus build it, and had dismissed it as the performance of a new hire who didn't yet understand how things worked here. He had not looked closely at what it contained. What it contained was 7 weeks of cross-reference data, completion timestamps, contractor sign-ins, bid records, material delivery logs. Marcus had not flagged anything. He had not written summaries or conclusions. He had simply made the data accurate and accessible. The data said what the data said. Thomas Garrett looked at the system for 11 minutes before he called Renata Bloom. Renata Bloom looked at it for 4 minutes before she called Diana Calloway. Diana Calloway looked at it for 22 minutes. She did not call anyone. She walked out of her office down the hall to the elevator and pressed the button for the 4th floor. The 4th floor felt like a different building. The ceiling was lower, the lights were fluorescent. The floor was sealed concrete. The air smelled faintly of cleaning solution and something mechanical. Marcus was alone in the facilities office. He was at his desk. He was reviewing the HVAC maintenance schedule for the following quarter. He had a coffee cup at his elbow, ceramic, not a paper cup, because he had brought it from home and his reading glasses were on. He heard the elevator. He did not look up. He heard the footsteps, heels, deliberate, not hurrying. Diana Calloway appeared in the doorway of the facilities office. She looked around the room, at the whiteboard with the maintenance schedule, at the digital display on the wall that showed building systems status in real time, something Marcus had installed in his 3rd week using existing network infrastructure and an open-source monitoring package without being asked. At the desk, at the man at the desk. Marcus took off his reading glasses. He looked at her. He did not stand immediately. He stood the way people stand when they are not surprised, unhurried, deliberate, as if rising from a chair is a thing you do because it is appropriate, not because you are startled. "Ms. Calloway," he said. She had been here 9 years. She had been on this floor, she realized, fewer than 5 times. She did not think she had ever been in this room. Mr. Webb, she said, I've been looking at your maintenance tracking system. All right. She looked at him for a moment. There were things she wanted to say that she had not yet organized. She was not a woman who normally spoke before she was organized. It's thorough, she said. It's accurate, he said. There was a difference in that word, and they both heard it. The inspector. I know about the inspector. He had known since 11/17 when the building management system had logged an unusual sequence of elevator calls between floors 4, 25, and 27. He had not gone upstairs. It was not his floor. Diana looked at the whiteboard, at his coffee cup, at the folded jacket on the back of his chair, not hung, folded, and the scratched face watch on his wrist that was so old it had a winding crown. I need to understand what happened with the Starfield contracts, she said. I know you do. Can you walk me through it? He picked up his reading glasses from the desk. He set them down again. He looked at her directly. With respect, Ms. Calloway, that conversation probably shouldn't happen here without someone from your legal team and someone from HR. She blinked. It was not the answer she had expected. People on the fourth floor did not typically tell Diana Calloway who should be in a room before a conversation happened. You're protecting the integrity of the data, she said slowly. I'm protecting everyone, he said, including you. Craig Stafford was suspended that afternoon, without announcement. The inspector, who had been asked diplomatically but clearly to return in 5 business days, left with the assurance that Calloway Meridian was conducting an internal review and would have a full accounting of the maintenance records ready for her next visit. This was not a promise, it was a deadline. Thomas Garrett came to the fourth floor at 3:30 p.m. He did not knock on the doorframe the way Diana had not knocked. He stood in the doorway and looked at Marcus and said, "We have 5 days." I know. The renovation work on 24 through 26. I'll need access to the actual contractor files, the originals, not Craig's binder, and I'll need Leon. Leon Okafor.
Yes.
Thomas wrote something on his tablet. Done. What else? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Nothing else, he said. Thomas turned to leave. Mr. Garrett, Marcus waited until the man turned back. Is Craig still in the building? He's been asked to leave. Marcus nodded. He picked up his reading glasses. What happened in the 48 hours that followed, Marcus did not describe to anyone in real time. Leon was there. Leon saw it. What Leon saw was a man go through 17 files, original contractor agreements, material delivery manifests, city inspection schedules, structural engineering sign-offs, with the focused attention of someone who had once reviewed similar documents for buildings where the margin for error was not money but lives. He saw Marcus build a timeline, a real one. Not a narrative, not a conclusion, a timeline, hour by hour, entry by entry, cross-referenced until the gaps were visible and the gaps told their own story. The gaps said this: Starfield had been paid for work that had not been completed on schedule. The structural retrofit on the 25th floor had been done correctly, eventually, but the inspection paperwork had been filed 10 days early, which meant the inspection had been signed off on work that was not yet done, which meant someone had signed something that was not true, and that someone's name appeared on 3 different documents in Craig Stafford's handwriting, and that Craig Stafford had received. According to bank records that were not part of Marcus's file, but that Renata Bloom had quietly obtained through the right channels, a payment from a private account connected to Starfield's parent company totaling $41,000 over 18 months. Marcus built the timeline. He made it clean. He made it navigable. He sent it at 11:52 p.m. on the second night to Thomas Garrett and Renata Bloom and the company's general counsel, whose name he had looked up. He copied Leon. He did not copy himself. He went home. He was there when Nia woke up for school. The response, when it came, was not the response he had expected. He had expected a meeting. He had expected to be asked to present the findings. He had expected the usual choreography of institutional recovery, controlled acknowledgement, calibrated gratitude, the careful management of credit. What he received was a phone call from Diana Calloway at 7:15 a.m. the following morning. He was on the bus.
Mr. Webb.
Ms. Calloway.
I've read what you sent.
He waited.
Thomas tells me you did this in 2 days.
Leon did most of the cross-referencing. Marcus, she used his first name. She seemed to realize it immediately, not regretfully, but carefully. I want to discuss a change in your role. The bus moved through the gray morning. Outside the window, Chicago continued doing what Chicago does, surviving. I appreciate that, he said, but I'd like to get the building through the inspection first. She was quiet for a moment.
Of course, she said. The terms.
The inspection passed. Paulette Abrams returned on the 5th day. She had the same deputy and the same clipboards. She reviewed the documentation that Marcus had prepared, a complete remediation record, a corrected timeline, an engineer's certification on the 25th floor retrofit. Marcus had arranged for an independent structural engineer, not Starfield, not any vendor in Craig's orbit, to reinspect and recertify the work, and a proposed new vendor oversight protocol with built-in redundancies. She read it for a long time.
She said, "Who prepared this?"
Thomas Garrett, who was present, looked at Marcus.
Marcus said, "Our team."
Paulette looked at him over her clipboard. She was a woman who had been lied to professionally for 30 years and could identify honesty the way a musician identifies a note that is flat, immediately, without having to think about it.
She stamped the documentation.
She said, "I'll expect the quarterly report on the new protocol in 90 days.
You'll have it," Marcus said.
She left. Thomas stood very still for a moment after the elevator closed.
Marcus.
I'll write up the protocol documentation this week, Marcus said. Leon can present it to you and Ms. Calloway.
You should present it.
Leon did the work, he should present it. Thomas looked at him with the expression of a man who was recalibrating something. Diana wants to meet, he said, today if possible, 4:00. Marcus checked his watch, the scratch-face watch with the winding crown. All right. The 27th floor conference room had a view of the lake. Diana Calloway was already seated when Marcus arrived. Renata Bloom was there. Thomas Garrett was there. The company's general counsel, a woman named Sandra Park who had the watchful economy of movement of someone who spent her life in rooms where things were said that would later matter, was there.
Marcus sat.
He had not brought anything, not a folder, not a tablet. He folded his hands on the table. Diana looked at him for a moment. She had the quality, rare in people who run things, of being able to sit with silence without filling it. Craig has been terminated, she said. The matter has been referred to the appropriate authorities. We are cooperating fully.
Good, Marcus said.
I've reviewed your personnel file. She paused. Your full credentials, your work with the Corps of Engineers, the projects. Another pause. I want to be honest with you. I didn't look at your application carefully when you were hired. I delegated that.
Marcus said nothing.
That was my failure, she said. Not Thomas's, not Renata's. Mine. I set the culture that said what a Calloway Meridian person looks like, and that culture filtered what came to my desk. This was, Marcus noted, a real thing to say, not a legal statement, not a managed apology, a real one. The position we originally offered you, she continued, was significantly below your qualifications. I applied for it anyway. I know why, she met his eyes. I'd like to offer you the Director of Facilities and Operations role. The position didn't exist before today. I created it this morning. Full authority over the physical operations of this building and our 2 satellite offices. Direct report to Thomas. Compensation, she named a number. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The lake was visible behind her, gray today, flat, enormous.
I have conditions, he said.
Sandra Park's pen stopped moving. She did not look up.
I'd like to hear them, Diana said.
Leon Acaffer is promoted to facilities manager. He earns the salary the posting specified. He reports to me. He paused. He brought me the documentation before I asked for it. He was watching it for 4 months before I arrived. He didn't know where to take it. That's a failure of this organization, not of him.
Diana nodded.
The vendor oversight protocol I wrote becomes standard. No exceptions. Vendor selection goes through a 3-person committee. I am one, someone from legal is one, someone from finance is one. No single sign-off on contracts above $50,000. Done, Diana said without looking at Sandra, without hesitation. And I would like to have the option to work remotely on Fridays when my daughter's specialist schedule requires it. This was the smallest condition. It was also the one that sat in the room differently from the others. Diana said, "Of course." Marcus put his hands flat on the table and looked at the room, at the people in it, at the view of the lake, at the walnut table with its careful grain. "Then I accept," he said. It was not a celebration. It was an agreement between people who understood what had just been acknowledged. But something happened the next morning that Marcus had not anticipated. He was in the lobby at 8:47 a.m., the 27th floor lobby, the white leather chairs, the walnut desk, not to work but to collect a vendor file that had been misrouted to reception. Cassandra was at her desk. She saw him coming and did something complicated with her face. She said, "Mr. Webb," not sir. She said his name the way people say names when they are trying to correct a previous impression. "Good morning," he said. She handed him the file. Her hand, briefly, was not quite steady. "Though the other day," she said, "when you came in for the first time for the interview, she stopped. She looked at her desk. "I wasn't." "It's all right," Marcus said. "It isn't," she said quietly. He stood for a moment. He had the file. He could leave. It would have been easy to leave. "You work in a building that tells you what things are supposed to look like," he said, not unkindly, not as an accusation, plainly. Most people believe the building. She looked up at him. "It doesn't mean you can't decide to stop," he said. He walked to the elevator. The public apology happened on a Friday. Diana Calloway had suggested a meeting, a formal company-wide communication, a memo. Marcus had said nothing about how it should be done. It was not his decision. He had not asked for it. Diana had decided the memo was not enough. The building had a common area on the 4th floor, a break room technically with a round table and a coffee machine and a window that got no direct light. It was where the facilities team ate lunch. It was where, on a Friday morning with no prior announcement beyond an email sent 2 hours earlier, Diana Calloway arrived, alone, without Thomas, without Sandra, without a prepared statement. She stood in the break room of the 4th floor and she said to the people assembled there, Marcus, Leon, 2 other maintenance staff named David and Renee, and Delilah from building services who had been at Calloway Meridian for 11 years and had never spoken to Diana Calloway directly, that she had failed in her responsibilities to maintain a culture of integrity in this building, and that the failure had been exploited. And that the exploitation had been possible in part because she had not paid sufficient attention to the people doing the actual work of keeping the building standing. She said it simply. She did not read it. She looked at the people in the room. She said, "I'm sorry." The room was quiet. Leon looked at his hands. Delilah pressed her lips together. David looked at the window. Marcus said nothing. He was holding his coffee cup, ceramic, from home, and he was looking at Diana Calloway with an expression that was not forgiveness exactly and not withholding exactly, but something that understood the difficulty of standing in a room where you do not usually stand and saying a true thing. He nodded. Once, slightly, the way you nod to someone who has done a hard thing correctly. The quiet legacy. The new vendor oversight protocol took 40 days to fully implement. Marcus did not announce milestones. He did not send progress emails. He came in on time. He did the work. He went home. The protocol existed. It was in place. It would either work or it would show him where it needed adjustment. It worked. The first test came at 6 weeks when a contract for elevator maintenance came up for renewal. Under the old system, Craig would have called Starfield's affiliate and filed the paperwork in an afternoon. Under the new system, the contract went to the 3-person committee. Marcus reviewed the technical specifications. Sandra's representative reviewed the compliance documentation. The finance member reviewed the pricing against 3 independent bids. The contract went to a different company, a smaller one whose bid was $16,000 lower and whose compliance record was clean. Thomas Garrett mentioned this to Marcus in passing. Marcus said that's what it's supposed to do. Leon Acaffer's promotion was announced internally on the third week. He was called into Renata Bloom's office and told about the title and the salary and the reporting structure, and he had sat very still for a moment and then asked if he could make a call before he signed anything. He called his mother. Renata pretended to look for something in a drawer while he did. When he came back to Calloway Meridian the next morning, he stopped by Marcus's office. Marcus had an office now, a small one on the 4th floor with a window that faced the adjacent building's wall, which he had said was fine, and said, "I don't know how to thank you." "You documented what you saw," Marcus said. "That took 4 months of sitting with something uncomfortable. I didn't do that."
"You're the one who—"
"Leon," he looked at the younger man, "you're going to be good at this job. You already are." He paused. "Stop looking for someone else to credit." Leon was quiet. "Accept the protocol," Marcus added. "Always tell them about the protocol." The days settled. November came. The lake outside the windows of the 27th floor. Marcus didn't work on the 27th floor, but he passed through it sometimes when the building required it. Became something else entirely. Dark and vast and indifferent in the way only very large bodies of water can be, and the city pressed itself against it anyway because that is what cities do. He ate lunch in the stairwell on the 12th floor sometimes still, though he now had an office. Old habits, the light was good.
He picked Nia up from school on Tuesdays.
The specialist at Northwestern had said remarkable again at the October appointment. Nia had asked him what remarkable meant, and Marcus had said it meant doing something better than expected, and she had said, "Expected by who?" And he had said, "That's the right question," which had annoyed her because she wanted an answer and that was not one. She was 10, she had her mother's jaw and her father's patience, which she used against him regularly and effectively. He was not unhappy. There was a moment in December that he did not tell anyone about. He was in the building early, 6:30 a.m., before anyone but the overnight security was in. He was running a systems check on the upgraded HVAC monitoring he had installed in November. He was on the 25th floor, the one that had been at the center of everything, the one with the retrofit and the paperwork filed 10 days before it was done. He stood in the corridor of the 25th floor in the early morning dark. The overhead lights were on their timed circuit, just the emergency strips illuminated, and he looked at the wall. Just drywall painted, nothing to see. But he knew what was behind it. He had read the engineer's recertification. He had reviewed the load calculations. He knew the steel. He knew it was right now, correctly done, bearing what it was supposed to bear. He put one hand flat against the wall. He held it there for a moment. Then he took it away, picked up his clipboard, and went to do the next thing on the list. He did not think about the waiting room often. When he did, it was not with bitterness. Bitterness is expensive, and he had always been careful with his expenses. He thought about it the way you think about a steep trail after you have already come down the other side, with a kind of factual acknowledgement that it was steep, that the footing had been uncertain, that you had gotten through it by doing what you already knew how to do. He had sat in a white leather chair with a manila folder on his knee. He had been looked at and dismissed. He had waited. He had worked. In January, Renata Bloom asked if he would be willing to join the interview panel for the new senior project manager role, a 27th floor position. He said yes. The first candidate came in wearing good shoes and a confident expression and a resume that listed credentials in a way that was designed to stop questions, and Marcus looked at the resume and asked 3 questions that were not on Renata's sheet, and the candidate answered 2 of them and deflected the third. The second candidate wore shoes that had been polished but not recently purchased and carried a folder that was worn at the corners and answered all 3 of Marcus's questions, and then, without being asked, mentioned a structural inefficiency she'd noticed in the way the question had been framed. Marcus wrote 1 word on his evaluation sheet. Yes. In February, Diana Calloway stopped by the 4th floor. Not for a crisis, not for a report. She had a coffee cup, paper from the 27th floor machine, and she stood in the doorway of Marcus's small office and looked at the whiteboard and the system's display and the neatly organized desk. She said, "How are you finding it?" He considered the question as if it deserved consideration. "Good," he said. "Leon's team is strong. The buildings are in better shape than the records suggested." He paused. "The parking structure's third level has a drainage issue I'm going to address in the spring." She almost smiled. "I didn't mean the building." He looked at her. "I know." "A moment." "How's your daughter?" Diana asked. "Good," he said. "Her appointment in October." He stopped, started again. "The doctor used the word remarkable." "And what did you say?" "Nothing," he said. "I said nothing." Diana looked at him for a moment. At the watch, at the folded jacket, at the man who had come into the white lobby with the $42,000 desk with a folder worn at the corners and had waited quietly to be recognized for what he was. She said, "I'm glad you applied." He said, "I am too." She left. He turned back to the drainage report. In March, Leon presented the quarterly vendor oversight results to the executive team on the 27th floor. He wore a new shirt. His shoes were polished, not new, polished. He had learned this from somewhere. He stood in front of the rosewood table and the people who sat around it, and he explained, clearly and without rushing, what the three-person committee had reviewed and what they had decided and what the financial outcome had been. A projected annual savings against the previous 3-year vendor average of $214,000. And when someone at the table asked who had designed the protocol, Leon said, "Marcus Webb, our director of facilities. It's built to work without him, which is the point." He clicked to the next slide. "Here's how it runs autonomously." Marcus was not in the room. He was on the 4th floor. He was reviewing the drainage plans for the parking structure's 3rd level. His coffee cup was at his elbow, ceramic from home. His reading glasses were on. There was a photograph in his wallet, not on his desk, in his wallet, because he carried what matters with him, of a girl who laughed at things off camera. She was 10. She had her mother's jaw and her father's eyes, and a word that a doctor had said about her that meant, better than expected. Marcus Webb was not surprised by this word. He had always expected it. He had simply waited quietly for the building to catch up. Closing narration. There is a particular kind of person the world consistently underestimates. Not because they are weak, not because they are unaccomplished, but because they have learned through the kind of life that teaches these things that their worth does not require an audience, that competence is not performance, that the work is the work and the work is enough. Marcus Webb had sat in a white leather chair with a worn folder on his knee, while someone pressed a hand to her mouth and reached for a phone. He had not argued. He had not explained himself. He had waited, he had worked. He had let the building speak for itself, because buildings do not lie, and because a man who knows how to read a structure knows that the truth is always visible to someone who knows where to look. He had set his conditions with dignity, not anger. He had given credit to the people who had earned it. He had asked for nothing that was not reasonable, and he had required nothing that was not right. The fluorescent lights hummed on the 4th floor of the Hargrove Tower. The building stood. That was enough. That was perhaps everything. If this story reached you today, share it with someone who does the quiet work. Someone who holds the building up while everyone else is in the meeting. They deserve to know that someone sees it. This has been Bright Tailies. We'll see you next time.